my interest in beer started with, yeah, just sort of exploring the city and the different breweries that were starting to pop up. This is a beer from a brewery in Toronto called Blood Brothers Brewing. They're up near DuPont and Dufferin. We're like a world-class brewing city, so there's a lot of great breweries out there to experience. So yeah, I encourage everyone to check out their local breweries. Really quick, these are 2 empty cans that I've enjoyed. This one's from Great Lakes Brewery, one of the best in the city as well. And a newer brewery, just down Lakeshore in Mississauga. Yeah, like Lakeshore and Dixie, called Stonehooker Brewery. Also a short drive or a short streetcar ride if that's more your style. So we're surrounded by great breweries. Instead of needing a giant bag of grains to extract, and I can get into the the process a bit more in a minute, but yeah, they use an extract, so you just mix it with water, and that's much quicker and much more space efficient when brewing on a small scale. This is my kitchen counter, and these are the ingredients. So this beer that I'm making is a cherry saison. So a saison is a Belgian beer. It's light. It's very similar to a wheat beer, but it's light and it's a little bit spicy, very dry, so not very sweet, and it has sort of some it was like a farmhouse beer, so like some more like rustic spices in it. But it's a very light, very carbonated, refreshing summer beer. So yeah, so those are the ingredients. The bags of grains you can see are specialty grains. So you add just a little bit of each of these. I did about an ounce or 2 of each of these. So you can see there's a caramel malt, which adds some caramel flavor and some darker color. This is a Cara Pils malt, which is like a lighter malt. It doesn't have much flavor, but it's good for foam and mouthfeel. So it adds just a little bit of, so those sensory experiences. And then the one behind it is a wheat malt, which gives it some haze and some body. So, also in the first picture, there's, you can see my cherry juice and you can see my hops. The 2 foil bags are my hops, which are my flavor additions. I'll get to those in a minute. So the second photo, let me find it here. I'm measuring my grains here. So you can see I have my little scale here, and I'm measuring just a little bit of each of the specialty grains that I mentioned. So you can see I think I got 0.4 ounces there of one of them, and then maybe about an ounce of the other 2. So yeah, that's just a little bit, like I said, a little bit of extra flavor, a little bit of extra sensory ingredients that give it some mouthfeel, some body, some foam retention. Measuring the specialty grains, number 3, the photo there, you can see my stock pot. This is just a gallon stock pot, and I'm only using a half gallon of water at this point. And all those grains go into one bag, and I steep them like you would make tea. I just give them about an hour in the hot water. It's not quite boiling, it's about 155 degrees Fahrenheit. And I give it about an hour, and that sort of the water washes out and extracts all the sugars from these specialty grains. So what I'm left with is sort of like a dark amber colored liquid. Beer always starts really dark, and then once the yeast is done with it, a lot of those colors disappear with once the yeast is done, and you're left with a lighter colored beer. So once this has done its hour, I would take it off the burner and let it cool just slightly, and then I add it's a pound of malt extract. So I just mix that in with the water that's already had the specialty grains steeped in it. I add my dried malt extract and stir it, and I'm left with, like a dark, creamy, thick, sugary liquid. For those that don't know, the way that you make beer or wine or any alcohol is you start with a sugary liquid, you add yeast. The yeast eats all the sugars when you let it ferment. So you let it ferment for, for beer, 2 to 3 weeks, for wine, up to 6 months. You let it ferment, and that's when the yeast eats the sugars. And then once the yeast eats the sugars, you get alcohol, which stays in the liquid, and you get CO2 gas, which rises out of the liquid and escapes through the airlock, which I'll show you in a minute. So then I'm going to bring all the liquid up to a boil, and the boil helps to concentrate some of the sugars, as well as just, that's when you add your hops, and the boiling liquid with the hops is where you get some of your flavors. So picture 4 is me measuring my hops. So hops are a leafy green plant. They're a member of the marijuana family, so they actually look quite similar. They just have a different use. But the flavors are similar, if you're familiar with marijuana, some of the dank, earthy, grassy flavors, those are similar in hops actually. So if you didn't add hops, you would be left with sort of just like, a kind of clean, bready liquid. It is all grain that you're using, so there is some bread flavor that you've probably tasted in some beers before. The hops offset that and add herbal notes, floral notes, fruity notes, especially citrus. And that just helps to balance the beer, so it's not just cold liquid bread. And so you add the hops into the boiling liquid, and the boiling water helps extract these flavors from them. So I have two different kinds of hops here on my scale. The smaller amount at the top is my bittering hops. So those I'm going to add at the 60-minute mark, so at the very start of my boil, and they're going to boil for the whole 60 minutes, and that's going to extract a lot of bitter compounds from them. And it's not to make the beer bitter necessarily, it's just to offset the sweetness and the bready flavor, the malty flavor. So those are going to sit in there the whole 60 minutes. The second larger amount, those are my flavoring hops. I'm going to add them at the 5-minute mark. So it boils for 55 minutes with the bittering hops. Then I add my flavoring hops at 5 minutes left. And that allows them to, so because it's a shorter amount of time in the boiling liquid, the flavoring compounds, the floral notes, citrus notes, they come out. But because I'm then ending the boil, a lot of the bittering compounds do not get extracted. I would need more time for those. So some bittering from the first addition, and then the flavoring from the second addition. And that's going to go on, that's another hour for my boil. So picture 5 shows me adding the hops to the boil. So that liquid has been boiling. You can see how dark it is. That liquid has been boiling for about 55 minutes, and I'm adding my 5-minute hop addition here, which will help with flavor. So I would then take that off of the stove and I would let it cool. Some people use an ice bath to try to cool that liquid fast. Because I'm only doing a half gallon, it actually cools down pretty fast on its own. So I just take it off of the boiler, cover it, and let it chill. It's actually best to chill it as fast as possible. So if I had a much larger volume of liquid, like if I was boiling my whole gallon, or I was, boiling my 5 gallons like some brewers do, I would want to, use a fridge or freezer or an ice bath to cool it down faster. The danger here is that when you're done, so the boiling sterilizes everything. It kills anything in the liquid, it kills anything in the pot or in the pot lid. But once you are done boiling, you're then susceptible for bad bacteria and yeast that's in the air to get into your beer, and that can damage and spoil your batch. So it's actually best to chill it really quickly, get it into your fermenting vessel, in this case my 1-gallon jug, and cover it as soon as possible to try to avoid any bad stuff getting in. So yeah, if I was doing a larger batch, I would definitely need to figure out some sort of cooling method to get it down faster. Because you can't add your yeast until it's cooled, because yeast will die if it's added to liquid that's too hot. And you can see my 1-gallon fermenting jug here in picture 6. I'm adding 20 ounces of tart cherry juice at this point. And the tart cherry juice was in the fridge, so it's cold already. So another thing to note is that when I pour my liquid in, even if it's still warm or a little bit hot, it's going to hit cold ingredients, which will help cool it down a bit faster as well. So that's cold cherry juice. You can see it's about, what's that, maybe a 1/5 or a 1/6 of the total liquid is going to be cherry juice. And from there, I would then add my cooled wort. So the liquid, once it's had its additions of barley and hops, is now called your wort. So it's your unfermented beer. So I would then add that to this jug. It'll hit the cold cherry juice and cool down a bit. And then I would top it up with cold water until it hits the 1-gallon line, which you can see on the glass jug there. Picture 7 shows what that looks like when it's done. So that is 1 gallon of unfermented beer ready to enter fermentation. So at this point, it's reached room temperature more or less. I'm going to sprinkle in half a packet of brewing yeast, and I'm going to put it away in a dark room temperature place. So in this case, the bottom of a closet, and I'm going to leave it there for about 2 weeks. You can see in picture 8 what it looks like 24 hours later. So if you compare picture 7 and picture 8, picture 7 has some foam just from the liquid splashing on its way in. But a day later, once the yeast has gotten started, there's a really strong, thick layer of foam at the top. And that's because the yeast is going crazy. The yeast is churning and multiplying and eating all the sugars really fast. And that's causing this massive layer of foam at the top. And it's expelling a lot of CO2 gas. So you can see I have a hose attached to my airlock here. And the hose is winding its way around and going into a glass jar of water. And what this does is it allows the CO2 to escape through the hose. It enters the water where it turns into bubbles and bubbles at the top. By doing that in the water, it means that there's no air getting back in the other way. If I just left it open, the CO2 would escape from the top of the jug or from the end of the hose, but in between those sort of bursts of CO2, you could get air going back into your beer. And again, you're at risk of infection from some wild beers, or some wild bacteria or other stuff in the air that you don't want in your beer. So that's kind of what it looks like for 2 weeks. And yeah, that's the process from start to finish. It takes about 2 hours, like I said, and then it takes about 4 weeks from then until you have beer.